Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of DEO's Growth Secrets podcast. I am Jake Poole, the CEO of the Dentist Entrepreneur Organization, and we have a hot topic with us today. We're going to talk about M&A, buying and selling locations, and the state of the economy, and the future state of the economy, actually. So with me, I have Chip Fichtner, Principal of Large Practice Sales. I'm very excited, Chip. Do you want to give yourself an introduction? Because I think a lot of people have seen your business name out there, but they don't always know exactly kind of what makes you all different and what you guys do. So I'd love to hear from your aspect, how you explain large practice sales.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jake. I appreciate it. Large practice sales specializes in what we call invisible dental support organization partnerships, or IDSO partnerships. And an invisible DSO is functionally a group that wants to become your silent partner by buying anywhere between 51 and 80% of your practice for cash up front, with you retaining ownership in the balance. And that ownership may be retained at your practice level, at the parent company level, or a combination of both. But there are today over 1,000 invisible DSOs across the U.S. They've been around for 35 years. They are far larger than branded DSOs you may think of, such as Aspen or Smile Brands. And the invisible DSO's key feature to those that we partner our clients with is that they want the doctors to retain full autonomy, not just clinical autonomy, but they're going to invest in you because whatever you've done that's been uniquely successful, they want you to continue to do. They're not going to tell you who to hire, who to fire, how to pay them, when to be open, what procedures to perform, what products to use, or what payers to take. The invisible DSOs, excuse me, literally become your silent partner, and you get to benefit from their resources. And their resources are going to vary based on the partner that you choose, but most of them are paying 25 to 30% less for supplies than you are. They're paying 10% less for team benefits, 50% less for implants. And most importantly today, they're getting reimbursed at higher rates from the insurance payers than the independent dentists are. That's a very secret item today, but there are many of these invisible DSOs that are getting reimbursed at rates 10 and 20% higher than independent dentists. Now, they will all deny it, but it's happening.
So are these like family offices? Are these like large PE? Like what, a little bit more on the invisible DSOs and what to expect when you start talking to these folks?
Yeah, the invisible DSOs, again, have been around for 35 years. The largest of the invisible DSOs, a group called MB2, just recapitalized 2 weeks ago. MB2's recapitalization was their third recapitalization in 7 years, and I had over 50 really happy clients in that recapitalization. And some of my clients who have been with them for 6 or 7 years saw 500% plus gains on that retained ownership piece that they kept. But the invisible DSOs are typically financed by private equity, family offices. Some are financed by sovereign wealth funds. And a very little known fact is that the world's largest investor, which is BlackRock, which manages $10.8 trillion, has recently gotten into the game, and they today own 2 invisible DSOs, and they're looking for others. So in the first half of this year, over $5 billion of new capital was invested in invisible DSOs, which fortunately has given groups the capital to bid against each other for the balance of 2024. So we've been able to get some extraordinary values for our clients.
So, okay, I love it. And, we have come across a lot of the invisible DSOs, and we've even looked at, had members and people that worked with look at the structure and the way they come in. And yeah, we've heard a lot of things around, leaving autonomy up to the groups, letting the groups kind of continue to operate the way they're operating, and really providing kind of, financial support and really a little strategic support as well. So it's a whole different way of looking at it versus the opposite, is where, you're latching yourself onto a DSO and becoming part of the larger group, and you're essentially assimilating into what they're already doing. So it's a whole other world that that people have that option to go down. So given that you kind of are really working with, a lot of the large funds, a lot of the large places of resource, What trends are you seeing right now? I mean, what's the, they say smart money or the smartest people who have kind of large buckets of resources. What are the trends? What's going on? What's coming down the pipeline?
It's interesting. I think the election was a good thing for our business, primarily because it will put the brakes on what the U.S. Justice Department and Federal Trade Commission started trying to do in May, which was give the feds the ability to approve what they call healthcare roll-ups, which is functionally what an invisible DSO does. Is it partners with smaller practices as a part of a bigger entity. So I think the election will put the brakes on all of that, and that's a good thing. In California, your Governor Newsom on September 30th vetoed a bill that would have given them the right to approve or disapprove of any transaction, including buying a dental practice as small as $2 million in collections. So it passed the legislature, failed at Governor Newsom's desk, thank goodness. And the feds were in essence emulating that rule, and thanks to the election, I think that is gone. I think the threat of higher tax rates is now gone for the moment. I think ultimately we will have higher tax rates given our spending addictions. But certainly for 2025, I think we're in good shape. And so to me, given the amount of capital that's chasing great practices, and great practices are defined, and we'll talk about what they are, is pretty extraordinary today. I mean, we completed almost $200 million of IDSO partnerships for our clients last quarter, which is probably the best quarter we've ever had. The other thing that's happening is younger dentists are exploring the invisible DSO partnership route, such that in the last 24 months, we've completed $1 billion of these partnerships, over $1 billion, and 150 million of that were for dentists who are in their 30s. So these were not dentists who were looking for a retirement strategy. These were dentists who said, hey, maybe with an invisible DSO partner, I can go execute my growth strategy and I can buy other offices or add other offices de novo. But the invisible DSO partnerships can be really valuable for a growth-oriented dentist who wants to build something bigger.
Okay, so there's a few interesting points in there. Now, when you say that the last quarter was the biggest quarter, is that because the overall net number of transactions do you think is trending upward, or is it because transaction with IDSOs is trending upward and people are trending towards that type of transaction?
We only do invisible DSO transactions, so I can't really comment on other types of transactions, but the majority of dental consolidation is driven either by doc-to-doc transactions, typically practices with less than $1.5 million in collections, and a doc-to-doc transaction is really their only option. Whereas in my world, we're looking at practices that are going to have more than $1.5 million in collections, and they're going to have the invisible DSO option, which is going to be at a far higher value than a doc-to-doc transaction.
Okay, and I saw that, on your website, you guys are showing some multiples, and this is what we've seen as well. A lot of people are always wondering what the multiples are currently and what they're trending. They've held pretty steady. I see you all are seeing transactions 8 to 10 times EBITDA. Trends on multiples for you, and then where you're seeing that kind of go next year, 2025.
Well, first thing you got to do is qualify the practices that are achieving the kind of multiples that we're getting. They have to be a growing practice, 24 collections over 23 collections. They have to be a growing practice in EBITDA, 24 EBITDA over 23 EBITDA. They typically are more valuable if they have a younger doctor. It's getting very hard to complete transactions for doctors with a 6 in front of their age, which for a guy who's 64, that's a tough thing to say. But the reality is if you're a single doctor practice who is 60 something, you should have called me last week, not next week. So young practices, and then desirable geographies. And it's interesting how the definition of desirable geography changes on a regular basis. So last year, one of the highest value GP deals we did was in Michigan, whereas the hot states are typically perceived as Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Colorado, Arizona, Utah, Idaho. That's expanded. We've done some great deals for GP practices across the country. We did one in a small town in Kansas at 9 times EBITDA last year. So the multiples, if you have the right practice, are actually up. So if you're growing, you're young, you're in a desirable geography, the multiples are up. So in our close to 200 million last quarter, over 110 million of that was done at over 9 times EBITDA. Now, admittedly, those were larger practices which typically had 5 million or more in collections. But it's still a great time to be a practice if you have the right attributes that are sought by investors today.
That's fascinating. So, it's almost like the IDSOs are just getting better at understanding where the best fits are, where they can add a lot of value, or where they're going to continue that journey on with that owner. And then I guess for those folks that are smaller, they're just going to transact with each other until that practice starts to grow and become viable for the IDSO. Or like, how does it work for the smaller practices? What are their options?
The smaller practices have the same options that they have had for decades, which is a doctor-to-doctor transaction. And using very rough numbers, a doctor-to-doctor transaction will trade at anywhere between 60 and 100% of collections. We don't do those, so I am not an expert on that topic. But once you get above $1.5 million in collections, it's time to have a conversation and understand whether you qualify for an invisible DSO partnership. Because in many cases, the value that you will receive is going to be twice what you might get in a doc-to-doc transaction. Now, the caveat to that is you're going to have to stick around for a while. Invisible DSOs are not interested in doctors who are ready to retire or ready to leave. They're trying to create long-term relationships. So call it minimum stay for a 1 or 2 or 3 doc practice is 3 years. If you've got a larger practice, the elder doctors will often leave sooner. But if you have a young practice, they want you to stay until you die. They're eager, they're in essence paying a premium because you're going to stick around and run the practice with their help.
That makes sense. Yeah. And so, okay. And I'd love to go back to some of the legislation that has changed recently. So you see that it's going to be, obviously there were some headwinds coming potentially down the road with the legislation that got overturned. I don't think a lot of people were aware that that was coming down the pipeline where, these transactions were potentially going to have to be approved by, some government entity or some government group. I think we're all happy that didn't happen. And then do you
Yes,
expect things to continue how
very.
they're going then? Yeah. You expect things to continue how they're going on the transaction side?
Yeah, no, I think the cloud of the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission under the Biden administration will be lifted with our new president, which is a great thing. The fact that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, vetoed that legislation is a good thing. There's similar legislation pending in 6 other states, but given the election and given Newsom's veto, I think we may have dodged some bullets there. So it's pretty much a green light for doctors to achieve high values with some great partners, because with that $5 billion in new capital, there are some great partners out there. Many of these investors have done this before. There are a couple of groups that we've helped start new invisible DSOs with using our clients this year that are paying exceptional values with investors that have done this 5 times before, where they've invested in a great practice, use it as a platform to build an invisible DSO and then monetize it. There's one of those investors that we started a new invisible DSO with in late 23. They've already returned over $3.5 billion to their doctors and investors in the
Yeah.
6 deals that they've done in the last 10 years. So there are some experienced investors out there that if your practice is big enough to become a platform, there are some opportunities.
What's your sense on, because there's 7-8 years ago there's a lot of activity, and then there's been kind of, it seems like in the news some of the DSOs that were really active back then maybe on some financial hardships now. There's some in bankruptcy. There's some that aren't going to make it, and then it's almost like a round two, and people are probably smarter money coming in, smarter operators learning lessons in the past. What's your take on kind of this cycle that seems to have happened, if you've seen it, Just curious how you think about it.
Certainly transaction volumes for average value practices last year or in 2024 were down. But the reality is our clients are all exceptional practices. And so we are able to achieve record values in a record volume if you know where to look.
Mhm.
There's still plenty of money chasing dental consolidation, and that will accelerate. We had in 23, we had our first sovereign wealth fund invest in invisible DSOs. You've had BlackRock, the world's largest investor with 10.8 trillion under management, enter the invisible DSO space with 2 acquisitions in the last year and a half. So there's plenty of smart money still chasing dental consolidation. You just have to know where to look for it. Now,
Yeah.
given the fact that there's 1,000 of them out there, in our world, we consider 900 of that 1,000 on our blacklist, meaning we won't let them bid on our clients. And it's for a list of reasons ranging from management to money to they've partnered with some lousy practices. So you've got to be really careful in who you choose as your partner because ultimately these are partnerships. And so the amount of cash you get up front is certainly relevant. The initial value is relevant. But ultimately, doctors are playing the long game and they want to get a partner where they can see equity value increases, of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700% over a 10-year career. So it pays to choose wisely because all of these guys are great salesmen, and you need to know to look under the hood to figure out what they're really all about.
Yeah, when things were frothy in 2018, 2019, 2020, we would just tell dentists like, look, the best thing you do right now is just build a great business, right? I mean, a great business will always be valuable, and you'll never not have buyers if somebody can, partner with you and you both together provide a return for each other. And it's almost like I think in the industry we've gotten to that, we've matured to the point now where that is the case. Like the businesses have to be good to get that level of investment, and that's, I mean, think about for patients, this is a good thing, right? That means it's less poorly operated dental offices and more better operated dental offices.
Yes, very true. There's a flight to quality.
A flight to quality, that's a great to put it. So, and then would you say, from our perspective, we deal with mid-market folks at that million, really just about, like you said, that doctor to doctor transaction up to about, 30 to 50 million. And there was a lot of activity for our world in 2022, 2023. It actually did kind of seem to slow down a little bit amongst our kind of bubble. What is your outlook for 2025? Do you see back to a lot of transactions happening, especially in that mid-market, emerging market area?
Yes, absolutely. Again, the key is going to be quality.
Right.
The practices that are growing and have higher margins are going to continue to be extraordinarily valuable. I mean, in the last year, we've had 18 qualified bidders for some of our larger practices. We've had a dozen qualified bidders. So if you have a quality practice that's growing with the right systems, and most importantly, a doctor with a passion, a personality, and a plan. The 3 Ps, as we call it, make a big difference.
Mhm.
We had a doctor who came to us with an 8x offer and phenomenally charismatic doctor. And we ended up getting him 14 times EBITDA just because once we got him face to face with the right bidders, he did the selling, you know.
Mhm.
So it's not all about numbers. You've got to have a passion for dentistry and you've got to have a plan of how you're going to grow your practice or your group.
Yeah, it's a whole different way to think about it, in this type of transaction, right? You're like you said, you're looking for a partner. These are if you're a dentist and you're looking for, this is just the beginning of your journey and you see yourself putting effort in 10, 20, 30 years, this is a really good road for that, right? You're not going to kind of just sell and wipe your hands clean and just ride off into the sunset.
No, the reason we've had so many young doctors do these invisible DSO partnerships in the last year is because they have a plan for growth.
Right.
And with the right invisible DSO partner, they can execute that plan faster, better, and with no personal risk. The invisible DSO will put up the capital to drive growth, and the doctor can retain a 49% ownership piece with no investment and no risk, and benefit from the resources of that partner to help them grow their own empire and keep 49% ownership. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways to structure deals. If you have a growing practice and you're a passionate doctor and you're in the right geography, there are a lot of opportunities today that are better than remaining independent.
All right, last question is kind of looking into the future, going into next year, and the patient. How do you see kind of patient's ability to go to the dentist, or just the patient demand and the political landscape next year? Sounds like things are opening up. You're feeling good about the M&A landscape. How about the patient landscape?
You know, the good news about dentistry is if you look at a chart of revenues in dental practices over the last 20 years, it is steadily up and to the right. Certainly, we had a bump during the shutdown of COVID, but fortunately, people are interested in taking care of themselves. And it's hard to believe because many independent dentists say, you know what, selling out to corporate, that's not a good thing, or doing an invisible DSO partnership is not good for patient care. The reality is it's kind of the opposite. Any of the great invisible DSOs have already implemented AI in their diagnostic procedures, for example. And they're doing that because certainly it can be more profitable for them, but it's ultimately providing better patient care. So as consolidation accelerates, the independent dentists need to be aware of what their competitors in the community are offering to patients. And it's not just about the latest and greatest technology, but the world is changing. And the payers are paying more to the invisible DSOs in reimbursements than they are to the independent dentists because the invisible DSOs have leverage. And costs from a supplies perspective, for example, are significantly lower when you're a partner with an invisible DSO that's paying 25 to 30% less than you are. And ultimately, that's some serious competition. And so what I say to doctors is you will either join an invisible DSO or compete with many because they're now in all 50 states. The last state that didn't have a DSO or invisible DSO was Montana. And we fixed that with a client of ours in October of 19, who became the first Montana invisible DSO, or DSO for that matter. So they're out there. And what I urge all doctors to do is take a look at our website, largepracticesales.com, and contact me, and let's have a 20-minute conversation. And that's all I do all day is talk to dentists. And the great thing about that is I learn something from every dentist I talk to every single day. And I like to think that's mutual, but it's worth having a conversation to understand what your practice is worth today and maybe get some tips on how to make it more valuable over time if now's not the right time for you.
One of the smartest things a dentist can do is actually talk to somebody like you, get the few things like, well, if you just change this, you'd increase, the value of your business a little bit, and then go and do that. And you're happy to do that because it's just more valuable. It doesn't matter to you, right? It makes it easier to sell.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's a great strategy every 2 to 3 years to go talk to you and see where the gaps are. Well, Chip, we appreciate it so much. I personally am always fascinated. The world that you're in. You have your finger on the pulse of where things are trending, especially when money's coming into dentistry, and it's just something that a lot of people are thinking about. A lot of people want to know their exit plan. They really, I mean, this is the end game, right? They want to have their lives be set up for the future and for their families, and this is how you do it. So we appreciate hearing your perspective. Excited to hear that it's a bit of a green skies ahead, at least for now, and economically,
Absolutely.
legislatively. So good things coming. Excited for 2025, and reach out to Chip if you have any questions. And we hope to see you next year, Chip.